movie sequels. Is there a word that strikes more fear into people's hearts than movie sequels? Actually, yeah, there is heaps more terrifying words than sequels. But regardless, let's face it, to the common moviegoer, movie sequels generally tend to never match their originals. And, dare I say it, often feel like cash grabs.
I mean, every once in a while you do get a worthy movie sequel, but they tend to be very few and far between. And then we get those sequels that are just awful and totally ruin whatever magic the original had going for them. But today, I don't want to talk about good sequels or bad sequels. I want to talk about forgotten sequels. The ones that have become so obsolete and not talked about over the years that they have got into cinematic obscurity, leaving many probably not even knowing about their existence. Movie sequels that you may be shocked to know about, which may leave you scratching your head and asking, what, they made a sequel of that?
So join with me today as we go through my list of movie sequels that you never knew about.
Number 10, A Return to Salem's Lot. Indeed, the 1979 TV miniseries Salems Lot was based on the Stephen King novel and directed by Tobe Hooper, and was about a town being terrorised by a plague of vampires, and was so well received it even had a theatrical cut edited together for Europe, with many people to this day claiming that it's one of their favourite vampire movies and Stephen King live-action adaptations. So, henceforth in 1987, we got the now largely forgotten A Return to Salem's Lot, which was so lazy it just recycled the original movie's poster. No, seriously, look at this, they weren't even trying! And to top it off, the movie was directed by Larry Cohen, whom fans of awful cinema would know also directed the B-movie masterpiece, The Stuff. A Return to Salem's Lot is just as bad as The Stuff, only without the likability. So the first problem is, A Return to Salem's Lot has a real low quality about it. I would say it feels like a TV movie, but it honestly feels like it was shot in Cohen's backyard, and feels more like a fan film. It doesn't feel anyway like a sequel to the original Salem's Lot, in terms of style and quality, nor does the story even connect to the original one. Instead, A Return to Salem's Lot tells the tale of a community of vampires and the town politics involved, which is weird considering at the end of the first one, we saw all the vampires destroyed, but oh well. It also features the first acting performance of Tara Reid, which is weird. Lacking in both momentum and the scares of the original, has left A Return to Salem's Lot dead in its tracks. Number 9, Shock Treatment. Released in 1981, Shock Treatment is the sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, that's right, there was a sequel to Rocky Horror Picture Show. I'm not even making that up. Now I know this may come as a shock, so I'm just going to give you a few seconds to absorb this information. Okay, let's go.
So Shock Treatment returns to the lives of Brad and Janet, now played by different actors, as we see them live in their hometown of Denton, which has been turned into a massive TV studio. And if you're expecting to see Dr. Frankenfurter or any of the other characters you loved from the original, that's too bad, as Shock Treatment decides to tell a completely different story. Which I guess is fair enough, but then it should have been its own movie and not trying to connect itself to Rocky Horror. Now, the idea of reality TV taking over was actually quite ahead of its time for 1981, considering how mainstream it is now. But sadly, Shock Treatment just didn't have the shock value, so to speak, that Rocky Horror did. Instead, it's a not so impressive comedy movie with not so good musical numbers, which, unlike its predecessor, has rendered it completely forgettable. That and the movie also stars Barry Humphries and Rick Mayall, which is weird. Some of the original cast do return, but in different roles, which just makes Shock Treatment feel more confusing. It does, however, lack the star power of Tim Curry, who, by the way, was originally considered for the role of Brad in Shock Treatment, which would have been really bizarre. A failed attempt to recapture the magic of its predecessor. Number 8, Roadhouse 2. The original Roadhouse movie is one of the most celebrated action movies of the 80s, which showcased the badassery of Patrick Swayze as he takes down some thugs in a country town.
Keep the change! Roadhouse.
However, jump to 2006 and we got Roadhouse 2 Last Call, which had a thing and then something happened and
Okay, did anyone actually see this movie? Like, as in, anyone at all? Anyone?
So because Swayze had the good common sense to stay away from this turkey, Roadhouse 2 tells the story of the son of the original character in the first film, and something about him trying to save his uncle's bar from drug dealers, blah blah blah. It hasn't got Patrick Swayze, so who cares? Sometimes when it comes to movie sequels, replacing the lead actor can work. But if Roadhouse 2 is anything to go by, sometimes it's best to just leave it alone. Otherwise, you'll end up with a largely forgotten film. Number 7, Future World. In 1973, Michael Crichton gave us Westworld, a theme park gone wrong movie featuring robotic cowboys. It was a great fun and exciting movie, and in my opinion, very underrated. Sadly, however, I cannot say the same about the 1976 sequel, Future World, which doesn't have the simplistic storytelling and action of the first one. Instead, tries to make itself more philosophical in a story that dives into government corruption and conspiracies.
Look, it's easy. The first one was about robot servants going evil and killing the humans. There's no need to complicate things. Just have robots on murderous rampages without all this deep stuff and we'll be fine.
Yeah, Future World completely lacks the frills and spills of the original and takes the franchise down a different direction, which leads to a very boring movie. Oh yeah, and this movie looks very psychedelic, making it feel more like an art house film than a sci-fi. And also what doesn't help is the movie stars Peter Fonda, who spends most of the movie looking stoned out of his mind. And to top off just how weird and surreal this movie is, Yul Brynner, who played the villain, the evil gunslinger robot in the original movie, returns in a weird, almost abstract, poetical dream sequence, which literally makes no sense. The sad thing is, Westworld did have the potential for sequels, but clearly going in a weird and abstract direction didn't help. Number 6, Delta House. The follow-up TV series to National Lampoon's Animal House. Okay, we're bending the rules a little here, as Delta House was a TV show as opposed to an actual movie. But the reason it makes it to the list is because, unlike most movie-based TV shows, Delta House actually featured many of the original cast members from Animal House, reprising their roles. Delta House was screened in 1979, 1 year after the release of Animal House. But sadly, due to the show being screened in prime time, Delta House had to abide by TV regulation standards, which means many of the risque and edgy humour that made the original Animal House so memorable was now removed and replaced with more childish slapstick humour. As a result, the show was not well received and cancelled after 13 episodes, resulting in it becoming an obscure piece of pop culture buried by the sands of time or forgetfulness. The show also saw an early performance from actor Michelle Pfeiffer, who admitted doing it just to get work and some exposure, and referred to the show's scripts as being quote, unquote, terrible. I guess sometimes changing a format from movie to TV show just doesn't work. Number 5. Home Alone sequels. In 1990, the world fell in love with the story about 10-year-old Kevin McAllister finding himself home alone, where he must fend off 2 would-be burglars. In fact, people loved it so much that a sequel quickly followed. This time, Kevin was let loose in New York. And then in 1997, a third one came out, in which now we were following the exploits of a new kid with no ties to the previous movies, about evil criminals after some high-tech microchip, because, you know, Home Alone. And after the disappointing reception of Home Alone 3, it seemed that the series had bitten the dust. Except, there was a Home Alone 4, a 2002 made-for-TV movie which returns to the exploits of Kevin McAllister, only this time played by another kid, instantly making this movie unlikable. In fact, Home Alone 4 is so bad it doesn't even have a rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Yep, the movie isn't even worthy of a rotten rating.
Wow, when you think about it, that's pretty bad. All I can say is that after Home Alone 4, at least they learned their lesson and finally put a stop to this film series which had died a long time ago. Except that they didn't, as there was a Home Alone 5.
In 2012, yet another made-for-TV Home Alone sequel came out, titled Home Alone: The Holiday Heist. Yeah, this time they stopped numbering them, which is always a sign that the studio is embarrassed. And what's even more shocking about this uninspired cash grab is it actually stars Malcolm McDowell.
Okay, seriously, Malcolm McDowell. What the hell? You were in A Clockwork Orange. You're a great actor. Why have you been starring in so much shit in the last 20 years?
All I can say is fingers crossed that 20th Century Fox have now learned their lesson and we won't be getting any more Home Alone sequels. Because at this rate, we're probably going to end up with Home Alone in space. Number 4. S. Darko. Donnie Darko was a mind-bending, abstract sci-fi movie that came out in 2001, which not only introduced the world to Jake Gyllenhaal, but also intellectually tampered with the theory of timeline paradoxes and time travel, but told in a teenage angst way, which could make us connect to the disturbed main character, Donnie Darko. Although the movie can be confusing at times, the story is concluded by the end of the movie, and there was no need whatsoever for a sequel. But some numbnuts out there obviously thought there was, as in 2009 we got a sequel called S. Darko, which follows the exploits of Donnie Darko's little sister, who we briefly saw in Donnie Darko. Because Lord knows, when the credits rolled in Donnie Darko, I really wanted to know what happened to Donnie's little sister we saw for like 10 minutes. So the result is S. Darko, a pretentious indie film which is both incoherent and confusing, and doesn't make a lick of sense, while feeling pretentious to the core, in a muddled story that honestly doesn't feel like the script was finished when they started filming. Also, considering that all the main characters in S. Darko are pretty unlikable, I don't even know who I'm meant to be rooting for, making S. Darko a pale comparison to its predecessor, and one truly forgotten sequel. Whereas the first one was insightful and thought-provoking, S. Darko is just dreary, boring, and a miserable experience, and very unnecessary, as while watching it, one thing is certain, that we really didn't need a sequel to Donnie Darko. Number 3, American Psycho 2. In 2000, Christian Bale played the role of Patrick Bateman in American Psycho, the movie about a Wall Street hotshot living out his murderous fantasies, with the movie ending without the viewer knowing if the events we have seen throughout the movie really happened or if they're in the main character's head. Well, just jump 2 years later to 2002, there was a direct-to-video sequel, which featured a very young, fresh-faced looking Mila Kunis as the main serial killer.
Which is odd. I mean, I've got nothing against Mila Kunis or anything, but go from Christian Bale to Mila Kunis? It's just odd.
In fact, the movie has such a disregard for its predecessor. We see the character Patrick Bateman, not played by Christian Bale, murdered at the very beginning, serving a big FU to all those who love the original American Psycho. And if things couldn't get any weirder, the movie also stars William Shatner. Yeah, that's right, William Shatner, I shat you not, as he plays a college professor and FBI agent. Yeah, I can really see William Shatner as a professor and FBI agent. American Psycho 2 really dumbs things down and feels like a generic made-for-video teen horror movie. Whereas the first one was both shocking and thought-provoking, this one is just plain nauseating, and if you're a fan of the original American Psycho, then I suggest you skip this one. Number 2, The Rage, Carrie 2. Number 1, The Birds 2, Land's End. Oh yeah, you better believe it. This is not a practical joke, but Alfred Hitchcock's 1963 masterpiece about a town getting terrorized by a plague of bloodthirsty birds actually got a sequel in the form of The Birds 2, Land's End, a lame made-for-TV sequel which premiered in 1994, over 30 years after the original. No one may have been asking for a sequel by 1994, but by gosh, they went and made one anyway. But the movie is littered with that awkward kind of 90s cheese, which makes the film feel really cringy. It lacks the charm, wit, and terror of the first one, and replaces it with bad acting, unlikable characters, and awful special effects that actually look nowhere near as good as the ones used in the original. Not to mention, Tippi Hedren returns in the sequel, only playing a different character, making the movie feel more confusing.
Oh god, what's with these sequels and bringing back original actors only to recast them in different roles? Both Shock Treatment and The Birds 2 do this. If you've got the original actors, just cast them in their original characters. Otherwise, all it's going to do is confuse us.
It really isn't hard to see why this has been quickly forgotten about, and it seems that even the director of this turkey was so ashamed of this movie, he had his name removed from the credits. And yeah, that just goes to show how bad the movie is when its own director disowns it. Point is, if a classic movie is not broken and doesn't require a sequel, especially after 30 years, then don't make one. Otherwise, you may end up with one of the most forgettable sequels ever.
Well, that was my list into movie sequels you never knew about. I'm hoping there were a few shocks and surprises in there for you. And if you already knew about all these movies, well, aren't you just a smarty pants? Anyway, I'm Minty and I'm off on a quest to burn every copy of The Birds 2 I can possibly find. See ya!